when we think about the farmers' crisis and agricultural issues. We look at it from different angles. One is what can the farmers do differently? What can the government do? What can we as individuals do? To link with the farmers, with the land, with these issues, and B, in our own personal lives, what can or should we do differently? And more broadly, what are the social changes that would help all of these things to add up?
Yeah, so I think that's very much the way to look at it is there are so many different dimensions, and unless we are able to work and address all the dimensions, then the real solutions may not emerge. So the way that we are working, in Raita Swaraj Vedika in AP and Telangana, is that on the one hand we need to build certain alternatives on the ground, that the entire model of agriculture which is currently being pursued, and actually many of the government policies are actually pushing the farmers further in that direction, but that model is unsustainable, and that is a big part of the reason why the whole situation is becoming aggravated. There's an agrarian crisis. In Telangana, for example, the huge increase in the cotton cultivation in areas where it's not really suitable for cotton, at the cost of all the other food crops and diversity crops of crops that were being grown. That is one clear dimension of the problem. That the whole depletion of groundwater and the fact that you need to go like 1,000 feet below the ground to dig a bore well. So these are all the different aspects which make it clear that this model of agriculture is unsustainable. Therefore, we need to work on building a more sustainable model of agriculture. So for that we need to actually build up some ground examples on which work has been happening in the last 10-20 years. So that is one dimension. The other dimension is how the policies of the government are pushing this farmers further into crisis, and how we address the how we push for a better policies, better pro-farm policies. And even here, the one aspect is basically, intellectual work, working on what kind of policy should be there, analyzing the situation, what is going wrong, and what would make the situation right. See, that's one part of it. But the other and equally or maybe more important part is actually to build the political will in the current political system. It's not only just the ruling party and the government, but the whole political system, if it is ready to compromise on all the basic issues of the farmers, and ready to let all the small and marginal farmers go to dogs, right? Then even if we build up the best examples on the ground, even if we build up the best analysis of what needs to be done, it is ultimately not going to get done. So how do we build a pressure on the ruling party, on the government, and on the political system itself, that unless you respond to the farmers' crisis, basically, we cannot go ahead. So that's the kind of pressure that we need to build. So on all these three dimensions, I think we really need to work. And another fourth dimension, which is part of this pressure building, is that actually the entire civil society also needs to be involved in this, in addressing this problem. So it is not just a sectoral problem. It's not just that farmers' organizations and farmers themselves have to come on the streets and fight, and the others are just minding their own business. The fact that our whole food system is in a crisis should basically awaken the civil society at large, and so that everybody is concerned about this whole agrarian crisis as not only the problem of the farmers but our own problem. So this is also another dimension on which Raita Swaraj Vedika has been working. And unless I think we work on all these dimensions, we really cannot come up with a solution. Dinesh, I think there is some echo from your side, but if you want to ask a question, maybe you can just try try once more, or then send the question to Arvinda.
Yeah, Dinesh, can you see the chat window?
Yeah, I had some kind of a network issue.
Right now you're fine.
Yeah, I'm just putting on.
Okay, if you have a question, you can ask or you can type it in the chat window.
Sure, no problem. Thanks.
So Kiran, I was just wondering how Raita Swaraj Vedika has reached out to farmers, farm workers, and different people involved in the agricultural sector to address these issues comprehensively.
Yeah. Like I said, there are different organizations which are part of Raita Swaraj Vedika which are already working on the ground for alternatives and for sustainable alternatives. So that work has been going on for the last 10 to 20 years, and a lot of the alternatives now we are able to suggest at the policy level, that the government should support these kind of alternatives. There's already enough ground experience to actually prove that this is possible and this actually can make agriculture more sustainable. That work has been done both through NGOs, places. But at the other level, where we are talking about advocacy and we are talking about pushing for the right kind of policies, there are many farmers' unions in the state, or at least let me say there are a few farmers' unions in the state, and there are a few organizations which work with agriculture workers. So the approach that Raita Swaraj Vedika has taken is that we have tried since 2008 to bring all these farmers unions onto the same platform. So we've been engaging them on policy issues, on what should be the future of farming in the state, on what should be the what should be the demands that we should make to different political parties to put in their manifestos and so on basically what is the future direction of farming should be. So as part of that engagement, which began in 2008 but really picked up from 2010 onwards, we have been able to engage with different farmer unions, which some of which are also associated with political parties. But they all, when they come to our meetings, they come as farmers' representatives and not representatives of their political parties. The role that they need to play is actually push their own parties also to take a pro-farmer stand. So I think by working on this domain, by working both with independent farmer unions and the political party affiliated farmer unions, we've been able to bring a lot of them onto the same page. Essentially, many of the demands that we are putting out, whether it is on seed issues, whether it is on farmers' income security, whether it is on raising the minimum support prices for the farmers, or on giving a better crop compensation to the farmers affected by drought. All the farmer unions are speaking out with one voice. So I think that has been one achievement over the last 5 or 6 years. So now at least there is a unified voice of the farmer unions. That's why what you see is that when we talk about tenant farmers issues, every farmer union in the state is talking about tenant farmers issues, and then the media also sees this as not just that one particular organization is raising this issue, but all the farmers organizations are raising this issue. So I think that has basically been our approach, and our approach has been that we don't want to quote unquote own the issue. We want everybody to own the issue. So any analysis that we put out, it is all free in public domain. Anybody can use that analysis and make their own points, organize their own rallies, organize their own protests. But using this analysis, using our experiences, using our fact-finding visits and so on. So that way I think we've been able to broaden the base of people who are talking about these issues.
That's, when you mentioned your you recently went on a fact-finding visit to many of the farmers that were severely affected by the farmers' suicides. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us some of maybe some things that you learned during this visit? I mean, we have the broad picture, but maybe there are some details that people are missing out in understanding how this really affects families in different ways.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that this, the fact-finding visits that we did recently, I think that's a very significant development. And in fact, just today we had a planning meeting of how to take this whole, experience of the fact-finding visits further, both in terms of pressurizing the government as well as in finding the solutions. So essentially, in about 2 weeks' time, we were able to get together a team of 12 to 15 people who were going around different districts in the state, and in about 2 weeks, we were able to visit 140 families of farmers who committed suicide, and that has really given us a very good picture of actually what is pushing people into the crisis. And at one level, what it's been able to show is that almost all, I mean, I would say all the 140 families that we visited, those farmers committed suicide due to failure of agriculture. And this is one very significant point, because typically what the government does, the current government is doing it and the previous governments were also doing it, is that if there are 1,500 farmer suicides which have happened since last June, the government originally said that only 78 of them are quote-unquote genuine farmer suicides, by which what they mean is that these are farmers who committed suicide because of agriculture reasons, and all the others may be farmers, but they didn't commit the suicide due to agriculture, failure of agriculture. So this has been typically their claim. Only 78 they had identified, but after a lot of pressure and many bringing out many such cases both in media and through public means, they've actually increased that number to 321. So out of 1500, they only recognize 321 as farmer suicides. So about all the other farmer suicides, they basically put a big question mark. So they say that the scale of the problem is not as much as it seems, and that this can be dealt in a routine manner. So that is the first defense mechanism that the government has. And what happens is that when the other parties try to raise the issue, or when civil society organizations try to raise the issue, the government stand is that these people are just being critical about the government for various reasons. It could be political, it could be whatever. So I think the first thing that we have been able to establish, which I think the media also carried very widely on the front pages and so on, is that almost all the farmer suicides that are being reported in the media are all quote-unquote genuine farmer suicides. This has happened due to the farming reasons. That I think has really put the ball back in the court of the government, that actually something drastic is happening and something drastic needs to be done to address it. Secondly, it gave us a lot of insights about what is actually pushing farmers into suicide. Some of these reasons are things that we know because of our work in the last 5 years, but it has come out more crystal clear. For example, 75 to 80% of the farmers who committed suicide that we visited, they are all cotton farmers. They've all grown cotton, and the cotton crop has failed. They've invested huge amounts of money into the crop, cultivation, and now they are in deep debt and crisis. Secondly, we also found that 75 to 80% of the farmers are tenant farmers. So they have taken land on lease to cultivate, and so they are the worst affected, because in addition to the rest of the cost of cultivation, for all the inputs and so on, they need to spend another 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 rupees per acre just as a lease amount. Secondly, they also are not eligible for getting any bank loans, zero interest loans, any crop insurance, any compensation when the crop fails and so on. So they are really the worst affected, because they are excluded from all the support systems. And it's no surprise that actually 80% of the farmers who are committing suicide are tenant farmers. However, even this year the government actually has really failed in providing the tenant farmers the loan eligibility cards and so on. This is another finding. A third one is basically there is a pocket where there are sugarcane farmers, and because the local sugar factory has not been purchasing from the farmers, because they've declared that their factory is not economical and so on. So that has led to a crisis among the sugarcane farmers in some area. The other thing which has come out very clearly is that in many places actually the farmers are cultivating commercial crops like cotton and in some cases maize in areas where the soil is not really suitable, the climate and the water conditions are not really suitable. For example, the BT cotton that they are cultivating is more suitable when there is at least some protective irrigation. It's more suitable as an irrigated crop, but in many rain-fed areas it is being grown. So that is one thing that has come out clearly. Another thing is that there was a severe drought last year and there is another severe drought this year, but the response from the government has been very poor. So the last year's drought, actually not even a single block or mandal in Telangana has been declared as drought affected last year, which means that many support mechanisms, many compensation mechanisms for the drought affected farmers simply did not even get triggered. And this year there is a worse drought than last year, and even till date the government has not declared any drought affected mandals. So what this is doing is that it's basically pushing the farmers into much deeper despair, because if there is an announcement from the government that there is drought in all these mandals and we are going to give compensation and we are going to help the farmers to get out of the debt, or all their loans are going to be rescheduled and so on, you prepare mechanisms for that. That gives a hope to the farmers that the government is doing something to help you, so there is some hope. Let's at least wait another month, let's wait another 2 months. But even that kind of a hope the government is not giving because of the way that it has mishandled the drought situation. So these are all the things which have really come out very strongly in our fact-finding visits.
When you mentioned that I find it, many people might find it strange that something like drought, which, certainly is, nobody will blame the government for drought, but they'll blame them for not declaring drought and providing the compensation as required. So now that the farmers' unions, as you say, are raising these issues in a more united way, do you think that will help them in situations like this where there's something very straightforward and very obvious that the government should do? Even in such cases, if will the farmers be able to raise their voice on that?
See, we are hoping, because this has been a demand for the last 1 month that we are making, for the last couple of months, but really there is a technical reason which the government quotes that basically they need to look at the rainfall data until the end of September 30th, before they can declare a drought, which is also not entirely true. They can, in some of the worst affected mandals, they can even declare drought in August, which they have not done. But the comprehensive picture will emerge at September 30th. But now we are again 1 month after that and still they have not declared drought. But we are hoping that at least on this issue and on the issue of declaring some minimum compensation for the affected farmers, the government will come through very soon. So in fact today's meeting we were planning some strategies on how to pressure the government to do that as soon as possible. Then the second thing is that one response that the government has given to this whole pressure of farmer suicides is that they have actually increased the compensation that they give to the farmer suicide families, which I think is a good step. It's a welcome step. But our whole apprehension has been, which we were saying earlier also, is that if you increase the compensation for the farmer suicide families but actually reduce the number of families that you recognize, then that is going to make the situation just worse. So our demand is that you have to recognize all the farmer suicide families, and even if your compensation is not 6 lakhs but it's only 3 lakhs, it is still okay. But all the families need to be recognized. But at least I think that the government is seeing this farmer suicides as a potential, big problem in front of them. At least that much is evident, because of their declaration of increasing the compensation for the farmer suicide families, and in general, more favorable pronouncements saying that they are going to come to the help of the farmers. But really, in terms of solid actions, much more needs to happen, and much sooner, because every day there are at least 9, 10, 11 farmers who are committing suicide in Telangana, and maybe 4 or 5 committing suicide in Andhra Pradesh.
So I'd just like to remind Sonali, Rashim, Madhu, and Dinesh that you can jump in with a question either by speaking up or by entering it into the chat message. So I see a question from Rashim. But I'd just like to first pick up on, I feel that we have to recognize that all of us are affected by this agricultural crisis. When the farmers are at that extreme point of giving up and even committing suicide, this despair and this devastation comes all the way down the line, whether we recognize it or not. We are not at that level of destitution, but it's a kind of poverty that affects us as well. And so I just like to mention that and talk about how this situation affects people at every part of. Everybody is affected by farming. Obviously, consumers are affected. The shopkeepers are affected. Everybody is affected. So I hope that we can also talk about how all of us are affected and how we can speak from that position, not just as somebody feeling bad about what's going on with the farmers, but feeling bad about what's going on with our whole food system and our entire society. So that's a big question. We can also look at the question that Rashim has asked, which is coming back to your fact-finding visit. Can you tell us about how I for Farmers came into the picture? How did the I for Farmers effort play a role in this?
Yeah, so I for Farmers is a group which started in the US, several friends in New Jersey and in other parts of the US to help with farmers' issues particularly. So we've been working with them in the last couple of years mainly to help with some farmers' issues in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So 2 or 3 of their volunteers actually came from the US. Specifically for this purpose, spent 2 weeks in traveling around and so on. So they were one of the initiators of this whole thing of doing fact-finding visits to the farmer suicide families and also assisting the farmer suicide families. So that's where I for Farmers also comes into the picture. So I for Farmers and Raita Swarajya Vedika and AID, several groups together have done these fact-finding visits. Then there's another question which Dinesh has asked in the in the Hangout window, which is how can urban people in Hyderabad or near these villages help the rural people? So I think that kind of ties in with what Arvinda was also saying earlier. I think the first thing that we always try to do when we talk to people in the urban areas and even when I talk to people in the US is that we are all connected to the issue of farmers in a much more integral way than just looking at them as okay, these are people out there in the rural areas, this is some sectoral problem that they have and okay, we need to help. But actually it's much more than that, because it kind of is related to all of us in a much more integral way. For example, just if you look at this whole crisis in pulse production, right? So there's a huge shortage of pulses and the prices of pulse have really shot up and so on. So all the consumers are affected, and when we look at our nutrition, what kind of nutritious food that we've been consuming, I think per capita, the nutrition value of the food that's being consumed, when we compare, I think a study was done in 2012 or 13, comparing that with what was 30 years ago. Actually, per capita food consumption in terms of nutrition is actually lower now than what it was in 30 years ago, like in 1980s. So a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have actually moved away from growing more nutritious crops and bringing those more nutritious crops and foods into the consumption basket of the people. On the other hand, people are consuming much more processed food, packaged food and so on, where very small percentage of that actually goes to the farmer. Much larger percentage goes towards all the processing and the packaging and the middle people and the marketing and so on, to make certain companies richer, whether it's PepsiCo or whether it's some other company. However, such food also turns out to be much more have a negative impact on our own health. It is less nutritious, it's actually more harmful to health. In that way, actually, the more we go towards unprocessed food, the more we go towards buying more directly from the farmers or farmer cooperatives and so on, the more we go towards a system where we buy less, the food, the storage of the food and the transportation of the food is less. Actually, it is healthier for the consumer, it is better for the farmer. So a lot of things, I think, which are good for the farmers also turn out to be good for the consumers and good for the health and also good for the environment. So I think when we link up all these things and look at it, we find that a lot of the crisis that is there in our food system can be also addressed when we address the farmers' issues, particularly in India.
So I know that just to go on that tangent for a bit, because I think this is actually one of the most important aspects of our food habits that we need to talk about, because I feel that there's so much marketing and there's so much profit to be made in packaged and processed food. There's violation of laws right and left regarding the marketing of foods, the claims that are made about foods, marketing packaged food, getting the customer almost in the womb, marketing packaged food to babies in violation of all kinds of codes. And I know that you are also involved in organizations such as Sahaja Aharam, which tries to promote consumer awareness about food as well as about farmers' issues. So can you talk a little bit about the kind of efforts that Sahaja Aharam has done to link consumers with producers and with farmers' issues?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this is a very critical aspect, and if you look at it in terms of scale, then maybe effort like Sahaja Aharam or Earth 360, which is involved in millets promotion, and that's one of the efforts that AID is involved in, and I'm also directly working with them. These efforts may be small, but I think that they have actually a large impact, because it helps in developing the consciousness among consumers that if we understand our food better and if we link to more nutritious and more healthy food, then that's also better for ourselves as well as for the farmers. So in Sahaja Aharam, which is an initiative in Hyderabad, where the food is sourced mainly from farmers cooperatives, and it is organic food, it is pesticide free food, and even in the packaging and processing and the storage and all that, no chemicals are used. So this food is actually being marketed in Hyderabad in 3 or 4 different places. So we have basically tried to integrate 2 aspects. One is to bring this this kind of food, organic food, more in reach of the consumers. That basically at least for the middle class consumers, that they don't need to think that this is only for the Jubilee Hills, Banjara Hills crowd, where every product is 2.5 times of what the market price is. There are some really upscale organic stores also, but we have tried to keep the prices much, very much within the reach of common people. At the same time, like for example, now dal is selling at 210 rupees per kg in Hyderabad in normal stores, regular dal grown with chemicals. But organic dal in Sahajaram is selling for 180 rupees per kg because we had procured that dal a little while ago. So we are not going for exorbitant profit, but something which just gives us enough margin. At the same time, we are also giving a higher price to the farmers. So that is our bottom line. Our bottom line is to give a higher price for the farmers. So at least 10% what they would get above what they would get in the outside market. So that actually farmers are also encouraged into growing organic. So this is the kind of initiative that we've been able to run, and in the process what has been happening is that we are creating a group and a class of more aware consumers, and they also link up with the farmers' issues much more. So whoever is more interested in joining, they also volunteer in terms of going to the villages and connecting with the farmers and so on. So I think that has been a very good experience for us also.
So when the farmers are growing more organic food, are they also able to eat that organic food?
Yeah, so that is something also that we really encourage, that for example Earth 360, where we are promoting millet cultivation in Anantapur district in Andhra Pradesh, we have been making it a point, right from the beginning when we started encouraging farmers to grow millets, that first you grow it for your own consumption. In fact, when we conduct food festivals of millet food festivals and so on, we make sure that all the farmers in those villages also come to the millet festival, both share their own food and the preparations that they make, and also enjoy this, because their children need to eat, their families need to eat. So a lot of them have come back to us and say that we are really enjoying the fact that we are eating korra annam again, we are eating sama annam again, because we had completely lost the habit of consuming these foods because they were not even available in the villages. So we are making it a point that first the farmers should grow for their own consumption, and then they should sell it in the market, especially the organic food, especially the more nutritious food. So in the Earth 360 processing unit in Kadiri, for example, farmers can come and get their own, not just sell the raw grain, but they can get processed grain for their own homes also, free of cost, so that we don't charge you anything for processing, but you just give the grain, we'll process and give it back to you, sufficient for your home consumption, because that is really very important in our whole scheme of things.
So when we promote consumer awareness, for example, I'm involved in the organic farmers market in Mumbai, and so when we promote consumer awareness about millets and organic food and all of these things, we really try to emphasize that yes, this is great, this is important for our personal health, but that's not an issue in isolation. This is important for the health of our country, for our farmers, for livelihood security and the environment. So the part of the picture that has to do with farmers is what I want to ask you about. When we buy these foods and we have this hope that this will also be good for the farmers and help them avoid this highly risky, devastating style of farming that has gotten us to this crisis situation that we're in now. Can you tell us, how true is it? How true is it that converting to biodiversity and cropping patterns and organic methods of agriculture, to what extent will that help farmers get out of the crisis?
So I think definitely that's a very, or maybe one of the most, yeah.
Sorry, Ananda, can I just ask one more question before we move to that? It's related to the Sahaja Subhadra kind question. So, I recently saw a video, very ad. It's ad from Kisan tomato ketchup. Very, very dramatic and emotional ad. And what they are promoting is selling of tomato seeds. Okay. So, and recently my mom was here, and she from the kitchen picked up a tomato, and it was overripe, so she just put it in soil, and we had really good crop of like 2 big plants with 60 tomatoes on it. So one thing I was trying to understand, there is a huge market now for selling seeds also, right?
Yeah.
So are we trying to do something about the seed conservation, diversity, and letting farmer actually sell their seeds in market to people who are interested in kitchen gardens? And
Yeah, definitely. See, I think that and one thing is at the urban level, we are also encouraging this urban kitchen gardening and urban, rooftop gardening and so on. So we have actually a pretty vibrant group in Hyderabad working on these. I mean, basically, people growing home gardens and sharing that with the entire group, and there's a very vibrant interaction between all of them. And Sahajaharam shop, for example, also carries seeds where people can come and purchase seeds and so on. But at the village level also, one of the dimensions of this sustainable agriculture is to encourage farmers to save their seed or even grow seed. Even produce seed basically. So in Kurnool, in the sustainable agriculture project that we are doing there, one of the elements is to actually teach farmers to grow maize, to produce maize seed, which they can then either sell in the market or sell to other farmers in their own village and so on. That essentially seed production is something which is done by farmers in any way, in any case. Whatever seeds the companies are selling, also they are not produced in a factory, right? They are all produced in farmers' fields. But the more you make the seed production itself as something esoteric, something which you can only buy in the market, only then your seeds are going to germinate. That kind of a push which the seed companies are giving, we are totally countering that at the ground level. So, and I think that's very important dimension of the thing. In fact, just last 3 days. There was until 27th, 28th and 29th of October, there was a National Seed Congress which was being held in Hyderabad. So some of our people also went and made presentations there, and also we held a press conference just a couple of days ago to to basically counter this whole thing that the government thinks the developing seed sector means making the smoothening the way for the seed companies to establish their seed market. But we are basically saying that the way to grow the seed sector is by actually allowing the farmers to produce their own seed and empowering them, and also in making the seed available at less cost to the farmers. So these are the dimensions on which they need to focus. So I think that that's definitely a very important part of the picture. See, does that answer your question, Rashim?
yes, that does. Thank you.
Yeah, so I wanted to go back to what Dinesh was asking, actually how can urban people help? See, definitely I think urban people have a lot to help, apart from this kind of a thing, of helping the farmers, cooperatives, initiatives like Sahajaharam and so on. Basically through their consumer choices they can help the farmers, so that's at one level. But I think directly in this kind of crisis where there is 2 consecutive years of drought, and I think there needs to be a much more dramatic response also from the civil society. So at one level I think that people coming forward to give donations and to basically assist in these efforts to help farmers, I think that's one direct way in which people can help. We are getting a good response, both in places like Hyderabad and other urban places in India, as well as from abroad, but I think much more needs to be done. in terms of financial support and assistance. And even there, what we are stressing is, the financial assistance is required not only for the families where the farmers have committed suicide. See, that is something which is a humanitarian support which definitely is required. But also more support is required for finding solutions to these problems. How do we prevent more farmers from committing suicide? Can we save farmers' lives, and can we make agriculture more viable for them? So I think a more financial mobilization is also required to work on this dimension of the problem. What I was talking about, both the sustainable agriculture as well as the advocacy kind of work. So that is definitely one way in which people can help. Second thing is, we would like actually people to get involved more, in volunteering. In the fact-finding visits that we did recently, actually, out of the 12 to 15 people, there were only 4 people who were regular Raitu Swarajya Vedika people. All the others were people who came voluntarily. 3 of them were from the US, but there were at least 8 people who joined from various backgrounds in Hyderabad. And we want to see much more of this happening. Actually, just this coming week, we are again planning to go back to certain villages and do a more detailed focus group discussions kind of thing to bring out the different dimensions of the crisis. We want more people to come with us. We want volunteers to actually go and visit villages. We've also given a call for something what we are calling as Raitu Kosam. It's an initiative called Raitu Kosam, which means for the farmers, that we stand with the farmers. We are basically saying that in any group of people, it could be a group of employees from a certain company, or it could be a group of students from a college or a school, or a group of teachers, whatever. We want them to actually go and adopt certain villages. When I say adopt, what I mean is actually to connect. We want them to connect to a certain group of villages. It could just be 1 village or 2 villages, whatever. You go there and you observe the situation for yourself. See what kind of situation the farmers are facing due to the drought and so on. You also see how they are coping, because it's only it's not only how to seeing them as helpless victims, but also to see how resiliently they are actually coping with the situation, and still how can we help. We also need to understand, the people who go there need to understand what are their demands from the government, what is it that can be done by the public systems to actually help them in this situation of crisis. Secondly, we want them also to identify the most vulnerable people even within those villages. Let's say you go to a village, there are 200 families. There may be 10 or 20 families which are most vulnerable. Like they may be going through some health crisis, they may have additional couple of lakhs of debt due to somebody undergoing a surgery, or there may be severe alcoholism in some case. There may be a case where they are particularly deep in debt. So identify those most vulnerable families, and then you figure out how to help them. Just as a group of citizens, I'm sure that you can actually do a lot of things to help. For example, if there's a health crisis, somebody needs a surgery, can we arrange for that without they having to undergo that 1 or 2 lakh of expenditure, which will push them further into debt. So there are many ways, I think, in which people can engage, and we really want people to actually go out into the villages and connect with the farmers and with the villages.
Madhu, did you have a question?
Arvind and Madhu here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have few things in my mind I have to share that. I came from a former family background, so I have some idea about what is happening, and I did few groundwork on a couple of villages I have studied in Telangana. Actually, one of the idea we have to introduce to farmers, first of all, natural farming. I mean, with cow actually using that, having cow pesticides, we can use that, and which can replace by this actual pesticides and help for farmers to reduce the cost for production of the either cotton or chilies, which is the one of the helpful. And also we have to educate the farmers. Actually, all of them just blindly following traditional method for past 20 years. I mean, they are fully utilizing the urea or nitrogen to spoil the earth, and finally heavy usage of pesticides. Ultimately, all these things actually, which was providing by government itself and the shops itself, they are encouraging farmers and they are giving advertisement like that if you use this chemical so you can get more production. So ultimately farmer who is as an illiterate, they blindly following their words, and finally he is the victim. He is investing too much and finally he is not able to get the price. So shall we educate the farmers about the natural farming, which a traditional method which you using 100 years back, which will helpful for farmers? One of the thing in my mind.
Yeah, definitely.
Subhash Palekar sir, who is from Maharashtra, he is campaigning entire Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Maharashtra. In all areas he is campaigning and helping farmers. Please stop this type of farming and replace this method with our traditional methods using with the cow, which will help you in this tough situation for farmer.
Yeah.
Shall we educate the farmers?
Yeah, definitely. See, that's definitely part of our work. So when I was talking about actually changing the agricultural practices, right, earlier, that's clearly one of the main dimensions of our work. So it actually means, going towards more natural methods in farming, using cattle. I think cattle is one of the most important components, in farming. And when the, growing crops and cattle and animals, it's not just a cow, it could be a buffalo, it could be goats, depending on the particular area. In some areas, actually, goat and sheep are the most important animals that play a very important role. It could be even poultry, hens, and so on. See, essentially, the farming which is sustainable, you need to look at it as a very cyclical thing. That whatever inputs that come out of agriculture, if they can actually, let's say the fodder that comes out, instead of burning the crop in your field, the fodder goes to the cattle, and then the cattle manure goes back in the soil. So if you establish cyclical processes as much as possible, then your dependence on the external inputs goes down, and that is where that's the direction in which we need to move. So certainly I think the methods which are being suggested by Subhash Palekar are certainly one part of the solution. And but it's not just one set of methods. Basically there's a lot of phenomenal work that has happened in the area of sustainable agriculture. So what we are basically saying is that it's not just about turning the clock back or going into 1950s style of farming, because often the question that is asked is, are we going back? Are we, if those methods were really working in 1950s, then why did we have food shortages in 1950s? So these are the kind of things that people, first question that come to people's minds. What we are saying is that, see, this is not about going back to 1950s. In fact, some of the best improvements and innovations in agriculture over the last 30 years have happened in sustainable agriculture and ecological agriculture. So the principles of farming are the same principles which have sustained farming over the last 2000 years, right? So in that sense, we are going back to the more natural principles of agriculture. But in terms of methods, there are actually a lot of improvement, there's a lot of innovations which have happened, so that you can get much more productive, as well as at the same time protecting your soil, enriching your soil, and several new methods of controlling the pests, because pests also evolve. Like the pests which were there in 1950s, they may not be there now, but there may be many more new pests now. So you need to find new solutions for that. But all those innovations have happened or happening. This, if you are looking at modern farming, we are saying that actually the real modern farming is the ecologically sustainable agriculture, and the more quickly we move to that, the more progress actually we are making in agriculture. So that is the kind of way that we put it, both to farmers and to people who are looking at this work. I hope that answers your question. Part of this thing is about using natural manure and natural pesticides and so on, using cow-based products, using products which have come from animals. But part of it is also growing trees. Part of it is also using green leaf manure. Part of it is also growing at different kinds of crops which are more suitable to the soil, because cropping pattern is one of the most important things which actually makes agriculture sustainable or unsustainable. So these are all the things that we are emphasizing.
So I'd just like to give a chance to Dinesh, Geeta, and Sonali. We haven't heard from you so far, so if you'd like to jump in,
Yeah, this is Dinesh. Like, take 2 minutes.
Yeah, Dinesh, just before you start, I just want to say that Arvinda, we also should go to the questions which were submitted in the Google Docs and answer them, because some people took the trouble of submitting questions.
yeah, we will also do, do you want me to go through some of those questions now?
No, first let Dinesh go with what he's
Okay.
asking after that.
Yeah. Dinesh, go ahead.
So, Kiran,
Yeah.
see, I for catching and sitting the biome is that I had a lot of interaction with my colleagues. But unfortunately, most of them are like well educated, well experienced. They care what but that's what it is. They don't really care. Now, when I started, you've done my basic campaign. This is reasonably good. So I've educated them. So basically, I have a powerful background in my, in generations back. I have nothing. But I still, whatever the limited knowledge, some of the tools to ensure, that I have a Ramanjane, good friend of mine, and I could create an awareness. Now I could see some kind of support. I think support coming from parts of the country as well as the global. So what I think is that basically, yes, of course, you need the food soldiers on this, but I think somebody gives us space as to create this kind of awareness and make sure we could provide something to the farmers. Because right now, what we need is financial support, right? So it is treated like a dirty word to get connection or something. So we are saying that we support them and we get back the same support from the farmers when they come back on the field, produce organic food, and they will be able to give us organic food. So two-fold solution. One is that I want to make sure we could reach out to the urban population, specifically the corporates. Right? We have to influence the corporates, take the corporate initiative to get the good amount of money. That is one. Second is the Sahaja Ahar concept has to come deep into the city. Right? We have to have more outlets, and we are also thinking about the kind of the apartments and villa communities and all of this to give a space for Sahaja to come and put their stalls, whatever it is, or a kind of a truck or a bus that comes in and start buying. Two sources of finance. And as people start consuming, realizing a lot of health benefits, I think this is not going to stop. So there will be a constant flow of organic foods that will come into the city. So this is where I feel that actually a lot of us, people like me and my wife Geeta, we are trying to do something around it actually. I think we are better off doing this because there is always population or some guys who can go into the farmer community, but there is a lot of things that has to be done on that side. That's my question and also a suggestion.
Yeah, definitely, Dinesh. I think we should do that. Do you live in Hyderabad?
Yeah, I live in Hyderabad, but basically from Chennai, but speak to Hyderabad.
Okay. No, wonderful. I think that we should definitely, work on this. There is a lot of work already going on in terms of, expanding the outreach of Sahaja Aharam. But definitely, I think that, we need involvement of more people like you to actually spread out in different places. Just 2 days ago, we had a meeting with one of my friends from IIT Madras, who is now running, he started a company which works on health and nutrition. So there's so many people who are actually undergoing health problems which are primarily tied to nutrition, and they are advising them, to consume more millets. They're coming up with an entire nutrition chart of what kind of foods they need to consume, and they're recommending basically organic food and millets essentially, and more pulses and more whole foods. So the next question that the clients come up with is, where to get these, right? So we need to actually tie up all these different ends together and form those linkages. So certainly, I think if we can talk offline to work out how you can also help in taking the Sahajaram thing forward, in also maybe getting people, like you said, if some people are really interested in helping and in humanitarian assistance, which we welcome. Some people are more interested in finding more long-term solutions. So one of the solutions is to make these farmers cooperatives successful, right? So we already have 8 farmers cooperatives that we are working with around the state. So to make those farmers cooperatives successful also requires a lot of investment. So people don't need to look at it as a donation or a charity that we are doing, but actually that we are investing in a better future for agriculture, which will actually also come back to us. I mean, it's not that your investment itself is going to come back to you physically. I mean, you're not making it just as a donation, but also the whole benefit cycle is also going to reach you, because you are going to get more access to healthy food, organic food and all that yourself or your friends. So I think that's the kind of involvement that we need from people. So definitely, yeah. So Arvinda, I see one question that you put in the chat window, which came on the Google
that comes
Doc.
from Satyapal Guduru.
Yeah, that's right. So, the question is that the government fixed price of cotton at 4,450, but they were offered only 250 in the market. But actually, see, the numbers are actually that the government's price that they've fixed for the cotton is more like 4,200 or 4,150. Of course, there are 2 different types of cotton, so there's some variation in that. But the price that they are getting in the market is anywhere between 2,500 and 3,000. Okay, and this is really failure of the government, and I mean, it's really a dismal situation as far as the farmers are concerned, that whatever the minimum support price that the government fixes itself is actually low. It doesn't really help the farmers in getting enough income, enough profit, so that they can actually lead a better life. But at least it will make sure that they don't go into loss, right? But even that minimum support price is not being assured to the farmers. So in this case, basically the Cotton Corporation of India is supposed to procure, and they are supposed to have procurement centers all around the states wherever the cotton is being grown, so that whenever the market price drops below the minimum support price, they need to procure the cotton from the farmers at the minimum support price, so that if the market price is 2,500, they step in and procure at 4,300, so that actually the market price also goes up, which they are not doing. That's a big failure. I mean, we are really raising this with the local government also. It's the state government which needs to go after the Cotton Corporation of India to do it. And what we are basically saying is that, every single MLA from that area and ministers from that area have to take this as the biggest issue, because if you have about 60 lakh acres of cotton which is being grown, and the cotton farmers are getting 1,000 rupees less per quintal, then it's like the biggest disaster which is facing the state, and all the everybody needs to be out there in making sure that the farmers get a good price. So we are
Right.
organizing, so if you, I mean, that is what the government needs to do. What we are doing is basically trying to pressurize the government. On 29th of October, we meaning, people from Raitu Swaraj Vedika and people from Telangana Raitu Joint Action Committee did a big protest in the market in Warangal district. That is the largest cotton market in Asia. We did a protest there to basically highlight the problems that the cotton farmers are facing, both in terms of getting their support price and also in terms of the kind of grading that is done. Basically, farmers lose a lot in the grading mechanism. That a lot of their cotton is basically, they are told that the moisture percentage is too high, therefore we cannot pay the full price for this crop. Whereas they don't even have proper moisture meters there, and they are actually it is just happening at the whims and fancy of the traders. So this is something that we are trying to take them to the task at the market level.
Right, so this reminds me of something that we were talking about a while ago, and I was going to come to the bigger economic policies later, but maybe this will be a good time to talk about it. I know that you were talking about a report that the government of India had issued, where they rated states on how market-friendly their agricultural policies were, how market-friendly the states were, in the agricultural sector. And so there was a exactly inverse correlation. The states that were actually suffering the worst, the brunt of the agricultural crisis were actually given the highest rating for market friendliness. And so in the face of this push towards being market friendly and the World Bank's ease of doing business indicator, how does that impact the ability of officials at the state level who would be sensitive and want to respond to some of the issues that you're raising?
Yeah, that's right. So I think this whole push to basically say that this market-friendly indicator that you're talking about, the CACP, which is the commission which fixes the costs and prices agriculture at the central level, whose main concern should be actually how the farmers, they're the commission which actually fixes the minimum support prices. Their main concern should be how the farmers get a viable price so that they make at least some basic income from agriculture. So they come up with this kind of indicator where any state where the government is actually intervening in the market would automatically get branded as a less market friendly state, which means, for example, what we were talking about, if the cotton is selling at 2500 in the market and the government or the cotton corporation or even the state government steps into the market and procures it at 4300, right, which is the minimum support price, then that would be counted as a less market friendly state because the government is intervening in the market. So that actually goes against the whole logic of fixing the minimum support price and so on. So essentially this shows the kind of when we are talking about the this agrarian crisis being a policy driven crisis, this is the crux of it. The crux of it is that the government is completely going back on its original, see, there is a social compact, between people practicing agriculture, basically the producers, the consumers and the government, which is that the producers need to be assured certain minimum price as well as certain minimum income, and then they actually continue to produce, put all their energies and their money, investment, because most of the investment that goes into agriculture is private investment going out of the pocket of the people, farmers. They put in their money, energy, their time, their skill, everything into producing, right? And producing all the things which are actually the priorities of the country. If pulses are the priority of the country, the farmers produce pulses. If the cereals are the priority of the country, the farmers produce cereal. If cotton is, then farmers produce cotton. So they are ready to produce things which are, the priorities of the country. but they need to be assured certain minimum price and minimum incomes out of the farming. And at the same time, the government also protects the consumers that especially the poor people who need to have access to basic minimum food gets that at a reasonable price through the fair price shops and everything, and through Anganwadis, ICDS, the whole thing, right? So this is the social compact between the producers, consumers and the government, which has been there since 1960s, and that has sustained agriculture, since until at least the 1990s. But once the government starts going back on this, that unleashes the whole crisis, because nowhere in the world the agriculture can actually be sustainable at the mercy of the market forces. Agriculture is a fundamental occupation for the food sovereignty of the country and to produce all the primary needs of the country, and it has to be sustained through this kind of a social compact which is there. Unfortunately, the countries like US and through the mechanisms of WTO and so on, they are trying to push. They are basically not even trying. They have already succeeded in kind of breaking this social compact and pushing the countries more and more away from giving these kind of assurances to the farmers. At the same time, if you look at the farming in the US and in other the so-called developed countries, actually a lot of their farming is sustained through subsidies and supports from the government. When cotton farmers in the US produce about $5 billion worth of cotton, $4 billion worth of cotton, they get subsidies worth $4.5 billion. Okay, this is the calculation which we had done about 4-5 years ago. So their subsidies are almost equal to the amount of production that the farmers do. That means that without those subsidies, the prices would have been double in order to make the agriculture sustainable. So nowhere in the world can actually farming happen purely at the mercy of market forces, and this is something that we have to recognize. So we are saying that agriculture should be out of WTO. The whole agreement on agriculture, which is pushing the countries to towards more imports and of food and more imports of agriculture products and so on. All those things need to be stopped, and all the decisions that the country makes, any country, makes on trade related to agricultural products has to be done keeping the interests of both the producers and consumers of the country, but not dictated by certain notions that an open economy, right, which doesn't have any tariffs, which has free flow of all products from everywhere, chicken legs from Europe and beef from the US and wheat from Australia. The notion that unless you have such an open economy which doesn't have any restrictions on any of these things, that is the best economy, right? That simply has to be discarded, that whole notion, and I think that is very crucial to addressing these problems.
Thanks for exploring the topic for all of us to study and understand. I think we should try to move through the remaining questions because I know it's getting late on your end. So I will just read them aloud, and if anyone else wants to jump in, you can feel free to do so or enter it in the chat window. So I'm just going to go back to you had invited people to come and join on any upcoming fact-finding visits. So I think that is something where we could try to spread the word and encourage student groups, maybe groups from companies or universities to take part in that. What kind of qualifications would you want, or what kind of preparation would you want people to have who want to join these fact-finding visits?
We don't want to put in any prior requirements as such. I think that anybody who is prepared to be sensitive to farmer situations and go and have interactions with farmers in villages, I think is welcome. Any special skills would obviously help. Like I think certainly having knowing Telugu language would help. Certainly being able to make notes would help. Certainly being able to make a video recording of the interactions would help. I mean, all these things are additional skills. But I think anybody with concern is ready to, we are ready to take them. Because we'll have a team, right? So there'll be other people who will have the complementary skills and experience.
Okay, so I think this is something we can aim, maybe not for the next year. I think you're going again next week, but maybe in a couple months from now we could aim to get a group together. Okay, thanks. We'll share the contact information for Naveen. Yeah, actually now I have so much. Let me first get through the questions that people have sent in. There was a question from Satyapal about if I want to help a farmer from my hometown, or let's say farmers from my hometown, how could I go about that?
Well, see, I think that where do we start? We basically, I think, have to start with finding out what exactly is the situation there, and what may be the most important element, in the crisis that they are facing. So it is possible that the problem may be too much cultivation of cotton, for example, and cotton crop repeatedly failing. So there are many villages that we have gone where actually the whole area is simply not suitable for cotton, but still farmers are growing cotton because they found that the other crops are not really viable. There are no support systems for the other crops. If you grow jowar, nobody is ready to buy at a good price. If you grow tur dal, wild boar are coming and attacking our fields. So cotton is really the only thing that we can grow with some hope, right? If that is the situation, then we have to try to find solutions to the problem. I think so. First thing is, it really starts from having an interaction with the farmers in your village and really finding out the problems there. And once you have that preliminary interaction, then we can talk. You can talk to us at Raita Swaraj Vedika to then discuss about what are the most important things that can be done, because often the problems could be either technical, like this, about which crops to cultivate and so on. The problems could also be institutional, like let us say there are many tenant farmers there, but they are not getting bank loans. There may be people who lot of the cultivation may be being done by agricultural workers, but they are not getting sufficient wages. So maybe they are actually in a crisis situation, whereas the owners of the land are sitting somewhere else, and they are actually running the agriculture. So it could be different things which are happening in that place. It could be a failure of market, simply that the crops that they are growing, they are actually being exploited by some middle people in the market, and that is maybe the most important thing which needs to be addressed. So depending on that, I think we have to plan the intervention.
So what I'm hearing you say is that, in contrast to the fact-finding visit, where you could, you and your team might identify a place where the crisis has already progressed to a severe stage, and a team might come to understand people's issues and probably arrange some humanitarian assistance. If you were going to your own village, which may be, may not be in the crisis stage, but maybe heading there due to the kinds of farming and the kind of economic setup that is going on, maybe you would be able to intervene in some of the more long-term issues affecting the agricultural scenario.
Yeah, that's right. And one thing I think certainly is you should find out try to find out who are the most vulnerable families, which is the most vulnerable sections even in that village, and then try to see how they can be helped, because it's also a matter of how we prevent this farmer suicides kind of situation from happening. And there could be a water may be the most important problem there, or maybe too much borewell dependence. So it could be any number of problems. So I think the intervention has to be planned based on that particular situation.
Yeah, I mean, let me throw something into this mix, because I was just imagining. See, it's a different situation when you're fact finding in a village that's completely unfamiliar to you, versus going to a village where you know people and maybe they're not actually at the point of crisis. Maybe they're practicing unsustainable agriculture, but they think that their lives will improve if they can, practice it some more. Like, maybe if we got, maybe if we also went for more cash crops, or maybe, I heard that there are people promoting quinoa to rural farmers because you can sell it for 1,000 rupees a kilo. Now, how would you counter that? A farmer says, I'm interested in producing this grain, and now, what would you say to that farmer? Why is that not a wise choice?
We have to talk to farmers about short term versus long term. So that is a conversation that we always have with farmers. But we also do not expect that the farmers would immediately choose the long term over the short term. In fact, the human tendency is to actually choose short term gain over long term considerations. So the same thing, maybe the farmers would follow, but we will be understanding about that. But at the same time, I think that a lot of the long-term issues are already pretty clearly in front of the farmers. So I don't think that there is any village where, for example, the unsustainable use of water is not already clearly evident. So it is evident, but is there a way out? Is there a way out without really, without really facing some short-term crisis? That basically, let's say you're growing a particular crop which requires a lot of water, and it is clear that actually this kind of a water intensive crop like paddy is being grown based on bore wells, but we know from the experience that all the bore wells are going to dry, at least if not next year, the year after that. So then how do you shift to a better crop? This is something which we need to have a dialogue with the farmers. And the fact that it is not sustainable is already clear to them. But what is the way out, and what is the way out which doesn't burn our pocket and push us into debt right now, or this year or next year? I think that is where most of the solutions space lies. This kind of a thing, where there is one magic crop like quinoa or something where you can get a really high income. See, if somebody wants to make a high income in 1 year and really grows quinoa and get some high price in the market, let them get it. But it becomes very clear, I think, within a season or so, that this kind of a magic bullet solutions will not really work. Because if enough farmers are growing it, then actually the price is going to drop pretty low. And if that crop is not really suitable to that area, then the crop is going to fail in the first 1 or 2 seasons. So I think that there is also a trial and error element to this. But this conversation mainly is about short-term gain versus what is the long-term sustainability.
Okay, now we shall move along to a question that Bhavna Upadhyay submitted. She said, I noticed that one of the key expense areas, I think when talking about debt, his daughter's marriage. So what steps can be taken to reduce dowry and marriage-related expenses in the region? But I would say, everywhere. Why only the region?
Yeah, so see, basically many social issues in the rural areas also play into the crisis. So we try to bring out these things. I think this dowry and marriage expenses one definitely one element which is there. The government actually has come out with a scheme recently. The Telangana government, that they will give 51,000 rupees, for every woman's marriage, so that it covers the marriage expenses. It doesn't push the family into debt. So maybe that kind of a thing, if the government is ready to do as a largest, then that's fine. Of course, the question is, why should only the girl's parents, bear the expenses of the marriage, and why marriages need to be that expensive anyway. So those are, I think, some of the conversations for social change that we need to have. But I think that a short-term solution could be this kind of assistance if the government is ready to provide. But another actually very important problem which is there in the rural areas is alcoholism, which again is tied to the government policies also, that the government is is really going gung-ho over opening more and more liquor shops and liquor stores, giving them license all over the state, because that is a big money spinner, and the government gets a lot of revenue. I think about 1/3 of the entire revenue of the state government comes from liquor excise duty. So they want to promote liquor more and more, and in fact the government has come out with a statement that every 12,000 population we are going to have a liquor store. So that's a promise that they have made. So whether they have a functioning public distribution system or not, whether they have a extension officer for every 3,000 farmers or not, they are promising a liquor store for every 12,000 population. So these are the kind of things which we need to really counter. So I think this conversation on liquor, I mean the survey that we are going to do in the coming week, we are focusing on some of the social issues also, so that in the focus group discussions we do focus on the social issues of alcoholism, women's status in the villages, what's happening with women farmers, issues like this dowry and so on, and expenses on education, expense on medical systems and so on. But I must say that these things don't have easy solutions. So even in terms of advocacy, it is tied in actually with bringing a social change in the in the mentality of people, how they approach these issues. So that actually requires a whole different kind of approach.
Yeah, I also have wanted to ask earlier, can you tell us more about what's happening with women farmers?
Yeah.
How the agricultural crisis affects women farmers?
Yeah, so see, 70% of all the work in agriculture is actually done by women, and increasingly in many places actually women are managing also the farming. See, earlier it used to be that men quote unquote manage, but a lot of the work is done by women. So 70% of the women work being done by women has been there even in the previous decades. But now actually the women are also playing a bigger role in managing the farming, because often the men may be actually out on migration. There are many more single women headed families. So women farmers and their rights, I think, is one of the most crucial issues. Often what happens is that while the women are doing the farming, their rights over the land are not really recognized. Many times the pattas are not on their names. Sometimes they're not even on their husband's names. They are maybe in the father-in-law's name, and where they have even less say. in terms of getting any rights, and many of the government support systems are tied to having your name on the patta, title of the land. So we are basically advocating for changing many of the systems. To get actually women more land rights and pattas. So any new distribution of land or that's done by the government, should be done in the name of women. That's one thing which is already accepted by the government. But any revision of land records which the government is planning, you have to make a special effort to make sure that it is either jointly in the name of the man and the woman, or simply in the name of the woman, because that is what gives the maximum protection, to the land, and also make sure that the land is used really for the benefit of the entire family. So these are some of the things that we are working on, and one effort that we have begun is to organize single women farmers into cooperatives or some kind of collectives, at least as a self-help groups. So this effort has started in, we started it in a couple of districts, in Anantapur district and in Medak district. So we are trying to see how that progresses. This includes the widows of farmers who committed suicide, as well as other single women farmers. So that once we form them into self-help groups, we are trying to make sure that they both have very good positive interactions among themselves, so that they don't see themselves as in a very desperate situation, but they are able to find solutions to their own problems, or even demand from the government what they need, and so on. Secondly, we are also trying to see if these self-help groups can also become can be used to get more financial support, more financial inclusion from the banking system, from the insurance, and so on. So these are some of the efforts that we are doing, and we want to take them further. There's also an initiative which many of the people in our network have started, which is called Mahila Kisan Adhikar Manch. The short form is MAKAM. This is a national level initiative in which many different groups across the country are involved. People like Kavita Kuruganti, Asha Lata, and Sajaya, and all from Rukmini Rao, who are all part of our network. They are all some of the key people pushing this whole agenda. So I think we will hear much more about concrete work on women's farmers issues.
Yeah, that's good. I think that we should give you 45 seconds to make your concluding statement, but before that, let's again see whether Madhu, Rashim, Sonali have anything to add. There was one question which I'll just put out there if you think that you can, I'm not sure what, let's just give you a chance to consider it. Someone said that whenever the government tries to do something, there's always somebody for some political reason who try to stop any favorable activity that the administration tries to implement, so that the ruling party doesn't get any mileage out of that. So have you observed that? Do you have any counter to that?
Yeah, see, I think the political dimensions and these kind of dynamics, we have to keep them in mind. See, the thing is always, the way our democratic system works is that the opposition, the parties in opposition, always try to raise issues which, can put the government into a corner. So often, the genuine people's issues which people are facing are also voiced by the opposition parties. It's not that the opposition parties are in some way holier than the ruling party, as parties or as people, as individuals. But it is the role of the opposition party to raise those issues which are being ignored by the government. So I think if the government is sensible enough, then they will actually respond to those issues quickly and in an effective way, and then gain the political mileage themselves, right? Instead of denying the existence of the problem and then let the opposition parties gain the political mileage. So at least our position has been Like even last year, when we published our first pamphlet on farmer suicides, after the Telangana state was formed, we basically said this, that we don't blame the current government for the farmer suicides which are happening, because these are a result of last 10-15 years of policies, right? But if the government doesn't act on how to address the crisis and also how to help these families, then that would certainly be the responsibility of the current government. So that is how we actually try to position ourselves in terms of making the current government accountable. For example, recently, Congress and a whole bunch of political parties did a big band, statewide band on this issue of farmer suicides. We deliberately kept away from it because we felt that, okay, that's a political action which is being done, so we don't need to come out in support of it as such. But in any case, we are raising the farmer suicides issue, so we do it in our own way, so that we don't get bracketed with, let us say, obstructionist politics or something. But at the same time, I want to re-emphasize that it is the responsibility of the government to respond to all criticism on public issues. And it should not take the position that this is being raised by somebody to paint us in a bad light, therefore we won't respond to it. If they have to genuinely examine the issue, and if it is found that actually the issue that is being raised or the analysis that is being put out is false, then they have to counter that and say that it's false. But they can't say shoot the messenger, basically, that because these guys are against the government, therefore we won't listen to the issues that they are raising.
So on that note, would you like to sum up? And what we plan to do afterwards is, I have notes, you have a recording, and we have a lot of the documentation that you've shared. So we will prepare some kind of a report with including some audio-visual component, and we'll make this available. If you'd like to comment on our recent month-long publicity campaign on agricultural issues, and how we can also build on the kind of awareness raised by that, as well as this chat and other things, so that our efforts also add up and contribute positively to the kind of work that you and Raitu Swaraj Vedika are doing. If you can touch on those points and sum up for today, then that would be great.
Yeah, so firstly, I think that, I as well as many, all the people in Raitu Swaraj Vedika, we're very glad that actually there is a very, widespread response to the whole farmers' crisis and to the efforts that we are putting. Because it's very heartening to actually see that people across the board, whether in the US or whether in other countries or whether in India, in urban areas, I think people are coming out really sensitized to the issue of farmers and also ready to help. So there are people who, come and told us basically, I'm here, use me. So what we want to say from Raitu Swaraj Vedika is that we really hope that we will be able to use everybody's contribution and support and involvement. So we really welcome that, and I hope that this kind of interaction is a first step towards that direction. And I think the effort that AID is making in highlighting the agriculture issues and what i4Farmers has done in terms of they've put out a targeted fundraising campaign which may be ending in a couple of days, where they try to raise 20 lakhs and they've been able to raise about 14 lakhs of rupees. And this month-long campaign that AID is doing on Facebook, I think these are all very important efforts, because more and more people need to connect to this, and this is a very large issue because it concerns, it involves 60% of India's population directly in the farmers' crisis, and I think it concerns every single one of us. So on that, in that kind of a spirit, there is a lot that is being done, but there is much more, that needs to be done, and we hope that, every single person's, involvement, both financially and in, volunteering their time, can be utilized well, and we are trying to make sure that people can also be involved from anywhere. There are many ways that people can help remotely also, just in terms of analysis, in terms of writing, in terms of spreading the word, and in terms of let's say translations. All these things are where people can help. So we are we are welcoming more people to come and get involved in this work. And I think that I really see that with by strengthening these efforts, we are already making an impact on the overall situation and in terms of getting a better response from the government, and we can do much more. I think that we may be reaching a certain critical mass in terms of all this concern and sensitization that's happening on farmers' issues. And I think once we reach that kind of critical mass in terms of the support as well as our actions, then that may lead to a tipping point, where we see much more positive things happening.
That gives us something to aspire to.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah. On that note, thank you everybody.
I don't know if you'd just like to just talk a little bit about the rest of the team and how AID has contributed to some of the work that you're all doing on the ground. Briefly.
Yeah, so like we talked at the beginning of the beginning of this chat, both on the front of promoting sustainable agriculture and solutions to the problems, on the ground, building those kind of models, as well as building this kind of an advocacy network which can push for better policies. I think that a lot of people who are working here on the ground, and also the support from AID has really helped a lot. There are many projects which AID is supporting, not only in AP and Telangana, but all over the country in many states, where this kind of support to sustainable agriculture as well as advocacy efforts is happening. This is happening in Punjab, in Maharashtra, in West Bengal, in Gujarat, in Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, everywhere, Karnataka. So in many states this is happening, and I think that one of the, I think AID is one of the few NRI groups which is actually really doing focused work on farmers' issues and this kind of a rural crisis that is happening. So I think in terms of channeling the support of all the concerned people out there, I think AID has a very critical role to play. And I feel that whatever work we have done in the last 5-6 years in terms of in all these states, I think that is more of a stepping stone towards even more concerted and deeper work. So what we are planning is basically to build a programmatic kind of work where we have a very planned work of 3 to 4 years, targeting certain things and trying to achieve certain milestones so that we make a real impact on the bigger situation. And I think that is where AID will also have a crucial role to play, and all our supporters everywhere, to take this kind of a programmatic work to some level of success.
So thank you very much, Kiran.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining the call.
And we shall be in touch.
Yeah, thank you.
We should probably do this every quarter.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there are other people in the Swarajya Vedika network who can also communicate. There is Naveen, there is Dr. Ramanjanelu, there is Kondal and all these people. So I think that we can have interactions with more people. Okay.
So we should
bye
tonight.
everybody.
Try to have my technical setup a little better. If you can share your audio. See, I did actually attempt to, once you said that you were doing audio, I also